안녕하십니까? 고울담 치과병원 치과보철과
Hello, this is Kim Hak-woo of the Goldam Dental Clinic. Today I'm going to talk about porcelain fracture, which is a upper side complication. So I'm going to talk about reasons of the fracture, clinical consideration, and how to resolve the situation. So in 2012, in this literature, it shows of various implant complication, there is high likelihood of porcelain fracture. In case of implant, unlike natural teeth, there is no pedia and there is no proprioception. So it's weak against stress, and compared to natural teeth, there's more likelihood of porcelain fracture. The reason for such fracture that could be due to technical error, coping design, or the substructure thickness, occlusion, or patient factors. So there are many different reasons for the fracture. The first reason for technical error, it could be fracture due to bubble, and this issues. You don't know when it's delivered. A bubble, if it's not visible, you just delivered, and the patient might come back quickly to your clinic, and you could see there was a problem in the technical level. So, dentist needs to do a good job, but your technicians and your labs also needs to have a good quality control. So for this type of porcelain buildup, if it's done well, then you have to think about coping design. In the one-step procedures, coping is on the lower side sometimes, so you don't check. But in reality, if the porcelain, for it to be sustained, 1.5 2 millimeter, it would be the max for veneer porcelain production, and there should be coping design that can give good support. Actually, as we called cap in the past, the two small coping and put porcelain on top of it, it will break easily. So in this making it, full contour wax up, and then you do cut back and then put porcelain. It's more tricky if it's implant. For natural teeth, it's wider, but implants, when we use mostly neti made abutment is small, so it's not easy to create metal structure or do porcelain build-out on top of it. In 07 case, at that time, the process, I used wax. So I did full contour wax up, and then certain thickness was measured to create index, and then everything was cut back, then checked, and it was produced. So the process was rather complicated. Technicians could do it, but we cannot check every step. But since 2018 or so, CAD-CAM started to be used, and for full zirconia or PFZs, CAD design can be done beforehand. So you check design, and cutback design you could check with photo and make corrections. So now, compared to the past, you can reduce the possibility of the porcelain fracture from the design. And as I said before, in the past, you casted and you used for custom abutment, but mostly you used ready-made abutment. So premolar might be okay, but if for molar side, if it's wide, if you don't use good matching ready-made abutment, the metal structure could be uneven, and in the build-up, due to temperature difference, it could become vulnerable. And if it's small subset, and the porcelain being in different thickness, it fractured porcelain. So nowadays, mostly custom abutments used. So you create appropriate design and appropriate thickness. Prosthesis can be made with the custom abutment, and better designed prosthesis will be the result. So thick porcelain breaks, but thin porcelain also breaks. And for the smaller space area, the axis for placement or abutment implant diameter inevitably result in making it thinner, but with the porcelain buildup, and through various process, there's thin cannot really support, so crack could be result, and with after delivery, bular discoloration or fracture could be the result. So thin substructure should also be avoided. Another thing, when you tell the technicians for complicated cases, dentists needs to make a clear directions to the technician. So this was 2012 case, was class 3, and it had a lot of resorption on the upper side. Class 3 has a lot of strong occlusal force, so joint area is important. So for the posterior side, there's a lot of fracture, so occlusal stability and prevent fracture used metal. And for the anterior side, the patient, if it's natural teeth, there is loosening. So for class 3, because of the strong force, mostly crossbite patients do not like. So you go with edge bite, but at the end of the edge bite could result in porcelain chipping.
대부분 포세린 치핑의 원인이 되기가 많습니다.
So in 2012, I delivered, and for the anterior lower side, it was a bit of movement, but there was a pain, so I switched to bridge. And design-wise, in the metal area on the posterior side, in 2017, there was a fracture. It could be used, but on the anterior side, due to the concentrated force, there was chipping. So PFM or PFjet, when we make them, or the junction where porcelain metal made, or where the meet with the junction side, there should be at least 1.0 millimeters of distance in the centric stops. So all this needs to be considered, and all the situation considered, so I removed it. For the long unit prosthesis ER type, in creating, when you have to consider repair, if a cement type, they would have been very challenging. But from the initial design, the axis direction was considered and the path was adjusted for fit. So through axis hole, the prosthesis was removed, temporarily was used, and then I removed it, and depending on change of the occlusal point, design was adjusted. So in 2017, new build-up delivered, and it's been used quite well even now. So occlusion, porcelain fracture plays an important role. So for this case, on the number 7 backside, porcelain broke, so it looked dark. So I didn't do this case, but I took a photo of this because backside there was a fracture, but it's not important, so I polished it and asked a patient to continue to use it. But I said took a bite, and CO and COR position, it was moving around, and there was a bit of dual bite, anterior bite. There was no absence of anterior guidance. So on the back side, there was a lot of load. There was a premature contact, resulting in fracture. Then in coping design and also in technician does a lot of adjustment, still there could be fracture. So if there's a lot of fracture, what should you do? So porcelain fractured can be using composite resin, or you could use repair kit to make repair. But if that's not possible, you prep and you create double crown, or in case of ER type, or if the fracture is really big, the porcelain can be removed for remake or rebuild up. In reality, there's not many cases where you can do porcelain repair. This was not an implant case, but the patient would bite on fork, and there was a chipping of porcelain, but it came back with the chipped part. So if the metal is seen, even with the resin, the color will be bad. But with the repair kit, I could put it again, because the fractured part was saved by the patient. So this type of repair, but it's very tricky if it's posterior area. So this case, number 34, implant fractured. So, and the food was stuck in there.
이 경우에 보면은 long unit으로
So it was a
이 저걸 다 전체를
long
제거하고
case. So removing everything for repair was tricky. So what I did was the thickness was sufficient. So I prepped it, and as an overlay, partial PFM was used for delivery. So it was 2010 and up to 2019. It's being used very well. And you know, she was very satisfied with the result. With the pandemic, recall check is not really being kept by many patients, but hopefully it's maintained very well. And if it's EL type and if it's single or splint type, then you could just remove it and repair it. But if it's cement type, removing is tricky. So to find screw hole, sometimes process is grinded also while grinding. So abutment can be saved, but you have to create new crown. And you might think repair would be very quick, but if it's porcelain for used for a long time, there'll be a lot of crack. If you put in furnace, there's a bubble and burst. So you have to give sufficient time for repair because you sometimes need real build-up also. So take sufficient time for repair. So what we can think is, you know, outside of box, porcelain will fracture. So if it's weak area, do not use porcelain. That might be the answer. So the occlusive force is very strong for this case. Also, on the lower side, custom abutment was used and PFZ was used at the time, and gold occlusion, and the buccal side porcelain was used. So overall, after 10 years, for lower side, it was okay. But on the upper side, natural teeth, there was a mobility, and with the occlusive force being strong, there's a fracture on the bridge side. So PFM sometimes needs to be used, and in the lower recent case, there's porcelain occlusion at another dental clinic, and this was not an aesthetic area. So rather than using porcelain that can fracture, like 37, I said I will use metal. It's stronger, and that could reduce the fracture risk. Besides that, full zirconia is used a lot, but when we used to use a lot of PFM, then I covered at least one half with metal because the force will be stronger at the back side. And if there's no chimney, the porcelain is not supported, then it becomes vulnerable. So putting metal there might be more important. These days, unlike the past, you use not really veneer porcelain. So unlike left, like on the right side, monolithic or full zirconia could be used, but of course, it solves a lot of things. There's no fracture, but because it's zirconia, it's really long, and joint, if it's really thin, then joint fractures result in remake or removal. So technician, what you need to say is that joint made stronger. Besides that, there could be really strong occlusive force. So for those patients, as I told with the complications, splint would be recommended, or you could do botox extension. So the patient, when she wakes up, he bites a lot too strongly and is worried about implant being destroyed. So if you can get promise for compliance, then you could use nocturnal bruxism splint. So I could see he was really biting hard. After only 2 or 3 months, on number 23, the splint fractured. So with the splint, you cannot prevent bruxism. But what I tell the patient is when there's rain, it's like wearing an umbrella. When you have umbrella, rain will still continue, but you will not get wet. So with the splint, natural teeth, muscles, or other things could be protected. So if it's a compliant patient, then you could use splint. Botox could be another option, but sometimes patients do not want to use Botox. So you have to choose what is right for the patient or go with the patient preference.
자, 정리입니다.
So summary.
다른 보철 치료와
Like in
마찬가지지만
prosthesis treatment,
치주인대가
the
없어
implants,
충격에
which
대한
is more
완충작용이
vulnerable
임플란트
to
보철의
shock,
경우에는
to
포세린
reduce
파지를
portion
주기 위해서
fracture,
자연치 보철
you have to have a
디자인보다
more
좀더
proper
면밀하게
prosthetic
사용되는
design and have a better understanding of the materials. With the time,
시간의 흐름에 따라 환자의
the
자연치
implant
달리 변화가
does
없는
not change,
임플란트 보철의
unlike
과거와
natural
같도록
teeth, so periodic
정기적인
recall
체크와
check and occlusal
교정이
adjustment
필수라고 할수
will be more important.
이상
So we
임플란트
looked
보철의
at
합병
porcelain
때문에
fracture
포세린
this
파지를
time,
알아보았습니다.
and I hope this lecture has been
지금까지의
helpful
강의가
to you.
선생님들
And with
입장에
that, I will
작게나마 도움이
conclude
되시길 바라면서
this
여기서
lecture. Thank you very
인사드리도록
much.
하겠습니다. 감사합니다.